Let's get right into today's explainer. Look, if you've glanced at the housing market any time in the last few years, you're probably feeling this deep, heavy, and totally valid sense of frustration. It's like, no matter how hard you work, this massive piece of the financial puzzle just keeps slipping further and further out of reach. Today, we're breaking down exactly what happened, but more importantly, we're going to look at how you can build real wealth beyond this crisis.
Okay, I want you to picture this for a second. Imagine you're 28 years old. You did everything right? You went to school, got a solid job, stopped wasting money, and you budget like a pro. Then you open up a real estate app just to see what's out there. And bam, you see this number, $650,000. And guys, that's for a tiny unrenovated house built back in 1978. The monthly payment alone is higher than your entire paycheck from just 5 years ago. It literally feels like the game was rigged from the start.
And right as you're staring at that mind-boggling math, you'll inevitably get hit with that classic, outdated advice from the older generations: just save up and buy a starter home. A starter home? Come on, in today's economy, a so-called starter home feels more like a luxury yacht. People are feeling stuck. And let me be clear, it's not because they're lazy, and it absolutely isn't because they're buying too many lattes. It's because the whole landscape of housing has completely shifted, yet we're all still walking around acting like we live in the old economy.
For decades, the old middle-class formula was actually pretty simple. You go to work, you buy a house, you build wealth. And it worked. Back in the 1970s and 80s, an average home cost just 3 times the average annual salary. You could pay it off on a single income by your 30s. No problem. But take a look at today's formula. In a lot of cities, homes cost 10 to 15 times the average income. When prices skyrocket faster than wages for decades, well, eventually the math just breaks. And unfortunately, what breaks first is the middle class.
Part 1. The asset machine. Why housing broke.
Let's simplify this with an analogy. Imagine a room with 10 chairs, but suddenly 30 people walk in and need a place to sit. Naturally, they start competing, so the price to grab a chair goes up. Makes sense, right? But now imagine something way worse. Imagine some of the folks buying those chairs don't even need to sit down. They're just buying them up to bet the chair prices will keep rising so they can sell them later for a quick profit. That is precisely what happened to housing. Homes stopped being just, shelter. They transformed into highly competitive investment assets. And once homes became an asset class, the whole game changed. Entirely new players entered the battlefield. Average families weren't just bidding against other average families anymore. Suddenly they're going toe-to-toe with large companies sweeping up single-family homes, wealthy folks buying second homes, investors turning quiet properties into short-term rentals, not to mention foreign money pouring into local markets. Everyday families are essentially getting squeezed out by entities that treat housing purely as a financial vehicle.
Now, this crisis was really accelerated by a perfect storm. On one side, we had years of practically free money, cheap borrowing. When interest rates are super low, people can mathematically afford a higher purchase price on their monthly payment, which just encourages sellers to keep jacking up the prices. Then, on the flip side, we had incredibly tight supply. Building new homes is slow, expensive, and it's heavily restricted by zoning laws and labor shortages. It's kind of like pouring a massive bucket of water into a tiny bottle. That flood of cheap money hit a restricted supply, and the result? Housing prices practically launched into the future, while your salary, well, it stayed stuck in the present.
Part 2. The psychological toll. Feeling trapped. When housing gets this outrageously unaffordable, people's lives are quite literally put on hold. Because so much of your paycheck gets eaten up just keeping a roof over your head, you become financially fragile. And when you're financially fragile, you're forced to play defense. People delay getting married or having kids. They stay trapped in miserable jobs because the rent is just too high to risk a career change. They completely abandon dreams of starting a business because missing even one paycheck could mean getting evicted. It's an exhausting, heavy burden that forces folks to abandon long-term wealth building just to survive the month.
All this constant pressure, it triggers one of the absolute most powerful and dangerous forces in money: herd psychology. Look, humans hate feeling left behind. When your friends are finally buying homes and prices are shooting to the moon, fear completely replaces logic. Renting starts feeling like a personal failure. So what happens? People panic buy. They blindly follow the crowd into massive debt, locking themselves into huge 30-year mortgages with tiny down payments entirely out of the fear of missing out. And the tragic irony here is that the more people panic buy, the more prices rise, throwing gas on the fire. This creates so much generational tension. On one hand, you have an older generation whose wealth was essentially generated automatically. Seriously, just through the sheer luck of market timing and snapping up assets decades ago. To them, real estate is this beautiful success story. But the younger generation, they're hitting a massive brick wall. They have to forfeit huge chunks of their income just to get a foot in the door of that exact same market. And because money is so deeply tied to our identity and status, simply not being able to buy a house starts to feel like a profound personal failure.
Part 3. The new rules, building resilient wealth.
This is where we need to fundamentally shift our mindset from looking wealthy to being resilient. The outdated goal of looking wealthy today, it basically just means taking on a massive mortgage, carrying super high stress, and ending up totally house poor with zero liquidity. Sure, you look great on paper, but you're secretly drowning. The new goal has got to be building genuine resilience. We're talking strategic renting and intentionally investing your extra capital. The result is that you remain highly flexible, you keep a high savings rate, and you build a genuinely robust financial cushion.
You really need to adopt this mantra right here. Flexibility is greater than ownership. Society almost never talks about the hidden math of homeownership, the endless maintenance, the property taxes, the insurance, and the unbelievable amount of interest you're handing over to the bank. Renting is not automatically a failure. In fact, in a lot of cases, it's a highly strategic choice. True financial freedom actually comes from flexibility. If you are chained to a massive mortgage, you aren't free. You're trapped. Flexibility is what allows you to pivot, to invest, and to adapt to whatever life throws at you.
Because true wealth is actually a holistic system, not just a single asset. While everyone else is obsessing over mortgages, they're completely neglecting the rest of the pie. We're talking about aggressively growing your income, consistent investing, maintaining a strong savings rate, fueling your career growth, and honestly, just letting time compound your efforts. You can absolutely build incredible resilience and wealth through these channels without ever owning a single piece of property.
So, what do these new strategies actually look like in the real world? Well, they often involve things like house hacking, maybe renting out a spare room or half of a duplex to offset your living costs. It might mean consciously choosing to live in a smaller space. Sometimes it involves moving to more affordable cities where your income just stretches way further. Or it's about strategic renting, where you rent a cheaper place and aggressively invest the difference right into the stock market. Now, I know these might seem like really boring decisions from the outside, but trust me, boring is secretly the ultimate superpower in finance. It compounds over time into true freedom.
I really want you to let this sink in. The rules of money changed. If an entire generation feels like they're falling behind, it is not an individual failure. You simply cannot compare your financial timeline to your parents' timeline. They bought homes in a completely different economic universe. Comparing yourself to a bygone era only creates totally unnecessary shame. And let me tell you, shame is absolutely terrible for financial decision-making. You didn't fail, the system just shifted while nobody was paying attention.
Which brings us to our final thought. The people who survive and thrive financially today aren't necessarily the ones pulling in the absolute highest salaries. They're the ones who adapt the fastest. They know how to separate their emotions from their finances. So I'm going to leave you with this question to ask yourself today. Are you stubbornly trying to play the old game, or are you finally ready to adapt to the new one and start building real, resilient wealth? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.